Let's get at her. It is another episode of the Mainly Broncos podcast, and we have an exciting show lined up for you guys today. We are inching ever so closer to the regular season, and we are grateful to have a first-time guest on the show. You've seen him obviously coming on the show before, but Kodiak of the Kodiak Broncos podcast with the Broncos, as you can tell, has joined us on the show. There will be no Brandon here tonight, obviously no Jordan, so it is going to be the two-man show. The two-man show of Kodiak and I. Make sure you hit that subscribe button over there on the MHRT Network page on YouTube, and as you can also tell and probably have seen, we are streaming on the X Twitter platforms, if you will, so you can see us on Brandon's Twitter account at Brandon Miller PO, Jordan's Twitter account at Jordan G. Lopez, my Twitter account as well, at Cameron Parker PO, and I believe Kodiak is also streaming on his YouTube channel as well. Make sure you leave a like and share and have your friends tell their friends about the Mainly Broncos podcast. How are you doing, Kodiak? First time on the show.
Man, I'm doing amazing. And obviously, when I met you 3 months ago at Mario's Flag Football Invitational, I was a little taken aback because I didn't recognize you were so dashing and handsome in person.
Appreciate it.
I'm so happy to be here. Obviously, got a lot going on. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm the Kodiak Broncos Podcast. You can reach me at Kodiak Broncos Podcast on YouTube or TikTok, as well as Horsepower Hour every Tuesday night.
I usually the way I always describe it is that I have the unique ability to have a face for radio and a face for TV. So that's usually kind of how I describe it. Or maybe we're playing the what if game a little bit too much on that. But it's gonna be an exciting time. Obviously, the term "what if" I feel like has been a little bit more famous in the last couple of years. Not so much from a sports side of things, but obviously the "What If" series that Marvel does with Disney, if you will. So it just feels like it's been ever famous, if you will, since that. So I just figured might as well take it and do some what ifs in the sense of Denver Broncos style. Obviously, we had a tweet like a week ago about like the what ifs, and so we're going to kind of carry it also forward into training camp, regular season of the 2025 season of like what ifs, right? Kodiak, what ifs of like what if the Denver Broncos don't have a running game? What if Bo Nix actually becomes this top 5 quarterback that everybody describes Jaden Daniels as, after his rookie season. So just a few examples, but it's an exciting show, and I am definitely excited to obviously talk about that Denver Broncos with you.
Yeah, I'm super excited, and let's get after it. Once again, the best thing that you guys are getting over there on the MHRT network tonight, you are getting not just the best faces in Broncos country, but you are getting the 2 best voices out there in Broncos media as well, between me, obviously, but also this dashing gentleman who also has a voice for radio.
That's right, and face for TV. You're the guest of it, of the show, so I'm gonna take it off for you. What would be when you kind of go down, and granted, there is a ton of what ifs in Broncos history, and we'll try our best to kind of talk about it all, or frankly, there might be, one that just comes across the dome, as we're talking about it. But, what is one of the first what ifs in Denver Broncos history that kind of comes off the dome?
So one thing that comes off the dome for me, I did not start following the NFL until I was 9 in 2010. And obviously we went 4-12 that year. So there's nothing notable that would have changed the trajectory of our season. But Tebow Mania 2011, we go 8-8. We start 1-4. And obviously we rise from the dead, and, we get blown out, but obviously we have in New England, but obviously we win that miraculous wild card game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I'm wondering, what if Peyton Manning never came here? Because our trajectory as a franchise was like this right after Peyton Manning never came here. But John Elway absolutely hated Tim Tebow. Like, there is no doubt in my mind.
Pretty obvious, Joe.
He did everything he could to, not build around Tebow. And, I think once we won the playoff game, he was like, all right, whatever. Like, we won a playoff game, that's mad cool or whatever. But, I felt like a lot of that season hinged on him trying to get a quarterback. Because remember, going into the 2012 draft, it was rumored to be a very, very strong quarterback draft, with RG3 and Andrew Luck, who was about as can't miss as it gets as a prospect as well. So, I guess we could kick off with you in saying, if the Broncos never get Peyton Manning, what do you think their trajectory is? Don't need like records or anything like that, but are there some fruits that never get realized? Do we never win the Super Bowl? Let me know.
I think that the first immediate reaction for me would be like, I'd assume he's committing to Tim Tebow, right? Like, I guess that would be the assumption.
Okay.
Is that he's committing to him. And if that's the case, what would the trajectory of the team be? Because I think that like and mobile quarterbacks have been a thing, if you will, just over the course of NFL history, but it kind of started to take off again right around that point in time in 2010, because you started kind of see Cam Newton hit a bit of it, right? In like a year or two. Colin Kaepernick started to kind of make a name for himself, if you will. Was it like maybe a year or two after that, right? Because that's probably going to be another what if scenario of maybe who the Broncos could have met in the Super Bowl in a certain year. But I just I think for me it's going to be like what would and frankly I might even lend into another what if of that scenario, because if he's committing to Tebow, who was the head coach at that point in time, John Fox.
Yeah.
So it's one where it's like, okay, are we going to be lending it into the fact that John Fox will still be the head coach? They're going to be leaning incredibly heavy on the 2011 defense, which is obviously really was underrated, if you will, in Broncos history, as far as the defense. So I don't know. It's one of like what ifs of what could be, in the sense like, because Tim Tebow, as we know, was a very run heavy quarterback, right? And rather successful with it. I mean, we kind of saw how Lamar Jackson is right now when he was beginning the part of his career, and he was a far better passer than Tebow was, obviously, coming into the league. But like, he was relying rather heavily on his legs, and so it kind of makes you wonder, like, would the Broncos kind of been jumping a trend a little bit early had they committed to Tim Tebow instead of Peyton Manning? Although I will say, I'm on record as to saying that if Tim Tebow doesn't have that year, I'm not so sure that Peyton Manning actually signs with Denver if he actually has that kind of year. So,
you know what? I think you're right. And that's the most fun thing about this, is that everything just stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks some more, because you just go down these domino effects. Like, okay, Tim Tebow, what if he never has that year? Does Peyton Manning ever come here? Because obviously we were a middling team at that point. We finished 8-8. We won our division, albeit it was a very, very weak division at that point in time. But, then Peyton Manning comes in here, and then we go 13-3 or whatever. But yeah, so then it just stacks and stacks, and you're just left with a whole bunch of hypotheticals, and that's what the show is all about. And the thing with Tebow is that, yes, he was Tebow time was chaotic, and it was very short-lived, but man, was it fun. Like, as a 10-year-old, it was so much fun being around Denver while all that was going on. And, obviously, even 10-year-old me, 11-year-old me at that time was smart enough to realize that, hey, even though Peyton Manning, even though he is a huge risk coming off the neck injury, man, if Peyton Manning was going to be, if anybody could put this franchise over the top, it would be Peyton Manning. Because I think a lot of people forget that Peyton Manning was not like a slam dunk at that time. He still had a lot of questions. Because, I think the surgery he got was relatively new at that point.
Could have even led into another what if of that too.
Yeah.
Because there's multiple different Peyton Manning what ifs that do connect to Denver, because it's like he had his surgery, right? So like, let's just say Indianapolis actually like committed to it, right? Like actually
Yeah.
committed to the idea that we're gonna help Peyton. We're gonna help him get through this. We're gonna actually work through him, work with him, if you will, and get his neck right, because he is the future of our franchise. Let's future and current state of the franchise. Like, let's work with him. Let's make sure that he's the right bit of health, and get him right, if you will. Obviously, that never happened. But I think the other what if of this is the other craziness, which after Tim Tebow, it gets to be a bit crazy, because it's like that Manning watch. One, it was a very obsessive year. Me as a fan, I'm sure you as well, but it was like a very obsessive year. As a fan, just getting the chance to be very obsessive, watching and or listening to all sorts of Broncos content or NFL content, or even listening to 1043 The Manning, right? Like even at that point in time, right? So like, and I think it was so funny, like that particular year, because like we were just leaving, and we got word, like we were leaving for Arizona for spring training. We just got word that Manning was released by the Colts, or that the Colts were moving on from him. And the early speculation was obviously the Broncos were going to be very interested in him, and obviously they were. But then it became word of like, oh, we're bringing in visits. Like we're starting to kind of stack in visits. So all during the time of like going to spring training, for anybody that obviously does not know, the Rockies spring training is in Arizona. And Arizona was like one of the heaviest teams that was in Peyton Manning. So to get a chance to actually like get the coverage of Arizona and the coverage of Denver all in like one trip, of not just the drive down, but the drive, or the like actually there. So like listening to, in the room that we're staying, of like, oh, we had Kurt Warner, and we have Larry Fitzgerald, and this is now the opportunity where Larry can finally have a quarterback that can be here for a little bit longer of a period of time. So it's just it was so fun to kind of hear that, and then you hear the different wrinkles that were starting to kind of sprinkle in, of the ones that maybe caused a bit more stress, if you will, of like, oh wow, we're going to have the San Francisco 49ers be the wild card of this team, or the Tennessee Titans, which is the strong emotional tie. So it's just funny when you mentioned the Tebow earlier, like how much it does kind of lend into that Peyton Manning what if.
Yeah, and I do have a question. How old were you at that time of that Tebow watch?
Let's see, it was right. It was 20. It was
2012, March 2012.
I was 25.
Okay, so I was 11, and I didn't know anything about the NFL besides Bleacher Report, because that was the only like avenue that I knew to like follow these things. So everybody, I remember saying, in the comments that Peyton Manning should have gone to the 49ers, and man, Manning on those teams would have been disgusting, beyond disgusting. But yeah, I remember at the time it was like, all right, we kept hearing rumblings. Okay, the Cardinals are out. Kept hearing rumblings. The Titans are out.
Right.
And then, if I'm not mistaken, it was down to us and San Francisco, but I'm not entirely sure. But think about what these teams were offering for Manning to come to their franchise. Didn't Tennessee
literally offered everything?
Yeah. Didn't they offer him an ownership stake in the team?
Yeah, it was everything.
I mean, if you
funny story about that. Do you know actually who broke the story?
No.
Cecil.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Anyway, but yeah, continue.
Yeah, so I don't know. They had just watched him just terrorize them for 14 years or whatever it was. And yeah, overall, it was just, I knew the magnitude of it even at 11 years old, even as somebody that didn't watch Peyton Manning in his prime. Of course, I knew who he was. I knew who he was even before I started watching football, because he was that guy. He was that level of quarterback. So yeah. Yeah,
it's, so it does make you wonder, just like, had he not chosen Denver, because it's just funny. And obviously this is all quarterback centric, but it kind of takes it to the other side of things, even post Peyton Manning, which is probably going to end up leading us to where we would be currently, if you will. But that 2016 year was, was like the wild quarterback turn of what ifs, because, it first started with, the one that is a bit famous, and that is like, what if Colin Kaepernick took that pay cut?
That would have been crazy.
Yeah.
Because, wow. Yeah, I don't know. I have to think a little bit about that one, but if I'm not mistaken, he got released at the end of 2015, right? And then,
or there was a bit of some rough water there with San Francisco.
Oh yeah, well, right? Yeah, no, he didn't get released in 2015, but yeah, so that would have been interesting because they offered him. I remember that whole offseason, they were just like, all right, Osweiler. Like at the time, if I'm John Elway, I say, Brock Osweiler, what do you want? Blank check. We are not in a position to, be going through quarterback turnover at this point in time. And then we went out and got Mark Sanchez. I remember.
I was literally just getting in the shower when that trade happened. Funny story, but yeah.
Yeah, and I don't remember. I remember. Did Sanchez even make the 53 that year? I don't think he did.
No, I don't even. Well, did he even? I guess the question, I'd have to go back and look, but I don't even think he even was like on the regular season roster. I mean, obviously he played in the preseason, but I'm trying to. I don't think he was on the regular season roster.
Yeah, I remember he played in the preseason, and we still had Paxton Lynch as our first round pick at that point. But I remember a lot of people, even I was in driver's ed listening to Cecil sell us on Paxton Lynch like the Saturday before.
Right. Draft. He was so big on, I'm granted everybody was, but like he was so big on Paxton.
Yeah. So then I think 10 days before the game against Carolina, it was announced that the Seaman Demon was going to be taking the first snap of Thursday Night Football. And man, oh man, Trevor Siemian, he held it down really, really well in the first part of that 2016 year. I was like, holy cow.
Even the beginning part, if we're being honest, like even the beginning part of like was it 2017? Like he was a bit of the point in 2017, right? Like,
yeah.
Well, because there was that point, like in the very beginning of the season where even Mark Schlereth, right? Like when he was kind of like started to kind of begin a little bit as a broadcaster.
Yeah.
Denver had that game against Dallas, which for some reason, obviously, I don't know what it is when Denver plays Dallas, but they always play really well against the Cowboys, and they blow them out. But after that game, when Siemian had that game, Schlereth started going on this thing on the fan about how we need to have this conversation about how Trevor Siemian, we need to extend Trevor Siemian. Like, we need to extend him. Like, let's give him a contract extension right now. And, clearly that, didn't exactly happen.
It never materialized. Although I still wonder what our 2016 team would have been like had it not been ruined by that horrible offensive line, because we still had so much infrastructure. The defense still had, they only lost Malik Jackson and Danny Trevathan the year before. But, think about the offensive line. It was just absolutely horrible. Like, it was an absolute nightmare. I still remember that game against KC, the double doink game where the Justin Houston had like 3 sacks in the first half because our O-line was so bad. And like Siemian, it looked like he was on an upward trajectory, but it just never materialized. And then in the 2017 year, we had that Cowboys game early on. But then when Vance Joseph was our head coach, completely spiraled. And I think, it's come out now that Vance Joseph's hands were kind of tied behind his back. But whenever we lost in 2017, we had a tendency to get our doors blown off.
Yeah. Well, and it was one where it was just like, we had the potential, but it's just like, I think that a lot of that was what was kind of like, and I've kind of made this point at times too, but it's just like your team to a certain extent takes the shape of your quarterback or your head coach, right? And so it's just like they were kind of taking, to where, right, like where they were with Siemian. Because like, as we're saying earlier, it's like the highs were really, really high, but like the lows were like, it was crashing and burning. Because like the one moment that just, it stands out in my mind about that whole Siemian year was the interception that he threw to Janoris Jenkins, and like it was just one where it's just like that was one of the worst interceptions I've ever, or throws, if you will, that I've ever seen. So just going back a little bit to the 2016 year was just so crazy because how everything led up to Paxton, because like it was, or even Simeon for that matter. Because it was one where it's just like you did start basically with Colin Kaepernick, but then like there was that middle part, which I think people forget about, which is, and that is the Tony Romo angle. Like there was that angle where is Romo going to be a Bronco, right?
Yeah.
And he obviously wasn't, but like there, yeah. So it was just, I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I remember in April 2016, I remember hearing rumblings that the Broncos were enamored with a quarterback prospect, and it was not the one they ended up taking. It was not the one they ended up taking in the first round that year. It was one who went to the Cowboys in the fourth round, who has, say whatever you want about him letting people down in the playoffs or whatever, but he has played at a very, very high level throughout the regular season. That's Dak Prescott. Now, once again, you could say whatever you want about him, but man, oh man, even Dak as a rookie, he would have been so much fun here. Like continuing with
the fit actually late at the time. I mean, obviously, hindsight is so 2020, but it's just like the fit would have been spectacular. Like looking back on it. But yeah, it's. I think the other part that if we're gonna go maybe even a step further or even backwards, when we talk about some of the things that kind of shape the franchise and history, you don't necessarily, need to look no further than probably one that might actually go down as maybe one of the best trades, not just in Broncos history, but like in NFL history. I mean, it was one of the first trades, frankly, that we'd ever seen of a player for player trade. And, it's like the perfect what if of what could be in Broncos history, which is a two-parter question, which is what if the Broncos actually committed to Clinton Portis, not traded him for Champ Bailey, and just Champ Bailey was continuing his rise with Washington, post Darryl Green. So it kind of makes you wonder. It's just like, it still probably would have been, obviously proven to be a win-win trade, but it's one where the question in the reason of like what's a two-parter is like not from the Champ Bailey angle, but like what if Clinton Portis stayed, and then what if in doing so Clinton Portis became the second best running back in Broncos history?
Yeah, that's a fun one to think about, especially because I know we had a handful of good running backs after Clinton Portis, but none were as good as him. That's just the reality of the situation. And then, it's tough. It's tough to think about losing, Bailey, because he is such a big piece of Broncos history. Unfortunately, he didn't accomplish a whole lot here from a team perspective. Like, obviously, he made the Hall of Fame, so I don't want to take that away from him. But
should have won the Super Bowl, but yeah.
Yeah, I know. In 2012, man, that was the year. That was the year to get it done. But yeah, I don't know. That's a really interesting question because it's just it's really tough to think about that, because then you think, okay, Clinton Portis, but then running back is such like a volatile position that you're just like, dang, what happens? Like we saw what happened to TD as much as that. So that's another really interesting angle to look at that as well.
Yeah, we did touch a little bit on David. We did touch a bit on the what if Elway isn't Stingy, or I guess what we said is like, what if Kaepernick took the pay cut? Just what could have been different. And then Paul mentions what if Manning stayed around for another year? I guess that would be I don't know why I thought of Elway there, but because there's a lot of people that thought, as far as a what if, I think there were some players in the locker room, like once they won back-to-back, like there were some players in the locker room that thought, well, what if Elway stayed one more year?
Mhm.
Could the Denver Broncos actually have gone back to back to back? And there were some players like in the locker room. I think Alfred Williams has talked about this. Where like they were pretty confident if Elway actually like stayed for just that one more year, if you will, for what was it, Super Bowl 34 at that point, that they would have went back to back to back.
Dang. I mean, going back to the Manning thing, like, I don't know. Had Manning just looked so cooked in 2015. And I know a lot of that was because of his plantar fasciitis injury that he had early on in the season. But man, he had a noodle arm throughout the year. So I really don't think, like, I know he's Peyton Manning, but as far as what we got from a combination of Simeon and Lynch in 2016, I don't think it would be much better, to be completely honest. Like, and that's no disrespect to one of our.
We probably would have made the playoffs, though. I mean,
yeah, I think we probably would have made the playoffs, especially because I don't think guys played for Trevor Simeon as hard as they did for Peyton Manning.
Just a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, but ultimately, that's just where I'm at. I don't think Manning would have been that big of an upgrade, especially because what did he go? 9 touchdowns to 17 interceptions in 2015. So, like, and I know, once again, injuries played a factor there. And I know that, but his body was just starting to break down because he had all those neck surgeries, and technology back then wasn't as crazy as it is now. So, yeah.
Josh Sherman mentions, what if John Elway, speaking of Elway, in 1999 takes Pat Bowlen up on his offer to give him a 20% stake in ownership of the Broncos instead of taking the last part of his contract? So that kind of like, I guess, is somewhat of the three, maybe the back-to-back-to-back question. But I think one thing's for sure, he probably wouldn't be taking an ownership role with the Colorado Crush.
No, you're probably right. Because so the Broncos sold for $4.65 billion in 2022. So you imagine 20% of that is roughly like 900 million. Man, oh man, he would have been a rich man had that still gone through.
Which also goes to show you how low the price was then to what it is now.
Yeah,
considering like the where the Broncos were, which was like what, no, he was right around like what, 4.6 billion is what it sold for. Yeah,
and just, I don't know, John Elway probably would have been very, very rich. Now, I don't know if he would have been like an executive. I don't know if he would have been like the controlling owner from the Pat Bowlen Trust once all that was, passed on. But I don't know. He seemed to really, really like his Joe Ellis right-hand man. And as we had seen, that
relationship kind of deteriorated,
and rightfully so. I mean, Joe Ellis, he kind of, I don't know a lot of Broncos fans that have very good things to say about him.
There's certainly one angle, and maybe this isn't necessarily a what if angle, but it's just like there are people, I feel like, that is like, maybe, I mean, John Elway certainly rightfully deserves criticism for, how the Broncos were certainly run. But I probably would say that it was probably Joe Ellis, who deserves a bit of more criticism, if you will, than John Elway. Because speaking of a what if, is also the one that is pictured on our, on our feature picture, if you will, for the show, and that is, what if the Denver Broncos hired Kyle Shanahan instead of Vance Joseph? In that year of 2017, because it's like. Right, because like there was that one part of this whole Joe Ellis and John Elway thing, which was, along with with Kyle Shanahan, was this marriage with Kirk Cousins, right? And Joe Ellis got his wish, as we found out, because his wish was Case Keenum and Vance Joseph. And I guess even somewhat of that angle of the what ifs was somewhat crazy a little bit, because there's so much of the Baker Mayfield angle in that year, everything. But yeah, the what ifs of what if the Denver Broncos hired Kyle Shanahan instead of Vance Joseph.
Man, I go back and forth on that one, because obviously Kyle Shanahan has built an amazing program in San Francisco. But, early on, they were on a tear. Like John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan were on an absolute tear. But here's the thing. Kyle Shanahan, the reasons he didn't want to come here reportedly, even though we probably would have hired him, or I don't think we would have hired him over Vance Joseph, but I'm sure he would have accepted the job. That's what I'm trying to say. Reportedly, he wanted full control. He wanted personnel control.
Yeah.
And after the year the Falcons had in 2016, any franchise that was desperate, like we kind of were at the time, would be like, yeah, honestly, after you have a record-breaking offensive season, if you want personnel control, why not? And, that's the part of the 49ers is that Kyle Shanahan is John Lynch's boss, not the other way around. But you're thinking about John Elway, one of the biggest football egos of all time. So then you're just like, how's that marriage? How's that marriage going to work? Is Kyle Shanahan? But then again, you look at how the 49ers have gone over the past 2 or 3 years.
Or so right now, yeah.
Yeah, people, I will say the subpar drafting in recent years has finally started to catch up to them, especially now that they have to pay Brock Purdy. So, yeah, and obviously the 49ers have been one of the most successful teams in the NFL since Kyle Shanahan got hired to run their program. But you think about Kyle Shanahan and Kirk Cousins as well. You get not only a coach who hasn't proven that he's been able to get it done, and then you have a quarterback who hasn't been able to prove that he can get it done either. So that's another really interesting thing is we'd probably be a regular season powerhouse. But once again, Elway didn't really leave this franchise in that great of a spot in the 2017 years. So I don't even know, I still think Vance Joseph was kind of set up to fail, and albeit we would have had better offensive coaching. But then again, 2018, you go into the year assuming you keep Shanahan, you're just like, all right, who's the quarterback? Because, I don't know if Shanahan would have liked to have rolled in with Case Keenum. Probably not. But if you're going Kirk Cousins, okay, you don't use a high pick on a quarterback that year because you signed him in the 2018 year when Minnesota did.
Granted, they didn't anyway.
Yeah, this is a fun rabbit hole.
But granted, they didn't anyway because they went and got Case Keenum, even though they spent hours upon hours upon hours of wanting to figure out whether or not they wanted to take Baker Mayfield. But yeah, it's just it's just a crazy one. And then obviously speaking of the coaches one, it's kind of hard to not talk about the other worst coach in Broncos history, as commented by David, and I saw Paul comment one. But obviously, what if Josh McDaniels was never caught cheating for his Spygate 2.0, right? Because man, I'll tell you, I will say, as far as being a young Bronco fan at that point in time, and obviously I was still rather young, even in the Tebow years, right, as we were talking about earlier, when they were undefeated, man, and we were wearing those just awful uniforms,
the mustard yellow,
the mustard yellow, and we beat the New England Patriots. So Josh McDaniels is just fired up on the sideline, just, after that win. It's just what could have been. Oh, and obviously the immaculate deflection, which, the Broncos ended up winning against the Bengals in a snooze fest. But what could have been, that was, man, that would have been obviously the biggest thing of that. What if is, you're not talking about trading Jay Cutler. You're talking about not trading Brandon Marshall. Speaking of a what if, and you're also not moving on from Tony Scheffler, which, everybody also remembers Tony Scheffler from our, best moment of Broncos history, which is the best 4-letter word.
Let's go Broncos! God bless Bo Nix!
We'll get to him later.
Yeah, why not? But yes, Josh McDaniels, it's funny, you listen to what DJ Williams had to say about him. He was just like, all right, that year, and DJ Williams ended up being a little incorrect because I think DJ Williams thinks that Josh McDaniels year was just one giant tire fire. So I'm not surprised that that's how he feels about how it went. But he says we started out 6-0, and then, they end 8-8. They completely collapsed. But in 2010, they get the Spygate thing happening. And then DJ Williams said, we were having breakfast and we knew we weren't actually that good. Remember? It was like,
Yeah.
Man, we were having breakfast, and I look over, and I'm just like, dang, I knew we weren't actually that good. We were cheating the whole year.
Oh man. But yeah, what is another what if for you? I mean, as we're kind of like piecing together all this little parts of history.
Okay, so I think I already kind of alluded to this, but let's just say the timeline with like Kirk Cousins and Kyle Shanahan, that never happens.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just say we go back to the 2018 year.
Okay.
And a lot of people were really projecting us to take a quarterback. That was the first year I really got into scouting, and I wanted Baker so bad.
You me both.
Because that was like the year that I had really caught on to college football. I was like, all right. I saw the game against Ohio State because my grandparents are like huge Ohio State fans, and I was just like, I need that guy to turn our franchise around. And I thought he could have been that, but a lot of people talk about us. In that year, there was obviously thought to be 4 quarterbacks who were basically first-round locks. Lamar was not at the time, but he ended up getting traded up for by Baltimore and being taken 32nd overall. But David, he was my second-ranked quarterback that year. So Baker, obviously off the board. Darnold, obviously off the board. What if
I think that was Lamar Jackson's year too, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was 2018.
Yeah.
But then number 5. A lot of people had thought that Elway would not help himself and kick the tires on a quarterback that was a lot like him when he was a player.
Mm-hmm.
He came from Wyoming. A lot of people were just like, nah, this guy can't read defenses. Nah, this guy's very raw, but had an insane amount of arm talent. So what if we forego the Bradley Chubb thing? What if we're just like, nah, we're straight? What if we're just like, all right, even though we don't have quite have the infrastructure, what if we draft Josh Allen?
What could have been? Paul read your mind. Yeah, it's the most logical conclusion would have been Elway had PTSD. There's no doubt in my mind.
Yeah.
Because and when we talk about PTSD, we mean about the other what if that we mentioned earlier, which is Paxton. He had to have some sort of PTSD. Now, granted, it's so funny looking back at the year because, for me, I was hit and miss. I was hit and miss on Allen because, it was one where, he was streaky. He was super streaky. And I think that maybe I was just so focused on the lows that I wasn't necessarily as focused on the highs. And obviously, one can say now that Josh Allen's a top 3 quarterback in the league. But it's just it was one where it's just if you see him and he's just on his game. And I think that a lot of that really came out in the Senior Bowl. Because I really remember that Senior Bowl and where he lit him up. It was pretty obvious that he was the best player on the field in that Senior Bowl. Even more than Baker, right? And so it was just one where it's just oh, wow. This, if he does that, and I think I remember saying something like that, but if he does that from that Senior Bowl, he's going to have a really, really good, play, actual career in the NFL. So, but it is crazy to think about the one quarterback, right? The one quarterback that we ended up taking or not taking, if you will, that we should have taken was Josh Allen. And I guess the other part of that too is which lends us into the possible what if scenario, because it was obvious we weren't taking Josh Allen. So, but it does open a bit of the other breadcrumbs of what could have been if they didn't take Bradley Chubb, right? Because there was the other angle to this, which is, I don't know if anybody remember this, but or maybe you do, because you mentioned that was your first time where you were really into scouting, but the Broncos had a deal in place. The Broncos had a deal in place with Buffalo.
Yeah, I remember this.
If I believe it was if Chubb wasn't there, but if Chubb wasn't there, and they had this deal with Buffalo, they take that deal, which means that they moved about the midway point, in the draft there. So, and I think I even had this talking point with Mario, but it was just who do they draft at that point? Because in 2018, I believe that was a Vita Vea year.
Yeah,
that was the James year.
They would have gotten 12 and 21, right?
Yeah.
2018, because
Yeah.
Buffalo had to trade up to number 7, right?
Right.
And then they traded up from 21 to 16 too to take Tremaine Edmonds. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. But okay, let's say the Browns go Chubb at 4 instead of Denzel Ward. Who do we take? Like Mike Kliss had reported that the Broncos' only board that year was, I don't know. You may have heard differently because, like, obviously you were
Right.
more connected and you have. But Mike Kliss had reported after day 1 of the draft that it was their board was Bradley Chubb, Saquon Barkley, or Quentin Nelson. Then if all those guys are off the board, who knows?
Which obviously they were.
Yeah.
Meaning Nelson and Barkley. But yeah, because it's like, do you take Vita Vea? Like, right? Like, do you take Vita Vea? Because I think at that point in time, like, they needed some run defense help, but also Derwin was there.
Yeah.
Right? Like, Derwin was there. So the fact that you had could you imagine?
Same
Like,
with Minka, right?
Well, like you're talking about, they just drafted Justin a year or two before that, right? So you would be talking about Justin Simmons and Derwin James.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
That would have been sick. But the problem with the 2018, 2019, I still stand by this too. And like, you guys can think it's a cop-out or whatever you want. I just felt like we didn't have the infrastructure to develop a quarterback. Like, we had aging weapons at running back or at wide receiver. Now, obviously, Linsanity was fun, but it was very short-lived for a reason. But the O-line infrastructure wasn't there either. Our offensive coordinator that year, Bill Musgrave, head coach is still Vance Joseph.
Mike McCoy and Bill Musgrave.
Yeah, then in 2019, like, we hire Vic Fangio. Who knows if Josh Allen would have saved Vance Joseph's job or whatever.
Right.
Our offensive coordinator is Rick Scangarello. Who knows how he develops? Our 2019 offensive line it took a huge step back from 2018. Then in 2020 or 2021, or no, 2020 was when this started. We hired Pat Shurmur. So, like, there's just nobody that can convince me that had we drafted any of those toolsy athletic quarterbacks that we would have found a way to make it work, because we just had so little like that a quarterback actually needs for development. And I think the biggest thing that a quarterback would not have gotten here is patience, because we already had PTSD from Paxton. And yeah,
I think that's the biggest lesson of all of it, because it's just like, it was one where it was just, we never would have had patience at all for it, as you said. Like, for one, like, we were already rich into the idea of, man, we miss Peyton Manning so much. Mm-hmm. We missed out on Paxton. Like, it was pretty fresh on our minds about just how rough things have been at that point. And that was only like 3 or 4 years after missing the Super Bowl, and so, like, it was one where, like, there's just no way from, the side of things where we would have, from a fan side of things, ourselves shown enough development to let, things work out for him, because we would have ran him out of town, right? Like, we would absolutely ran him out of town just from a fan side. Or even, frankly, to spin this, right? Like, David mentioned, Lamar Jackson. So this is another tidbit that I'll point out. When Mario took a poll in 2018, he took a poll. I don't think he's ever done this as of late, or at least maybe he has. He doesn't post it on Twitter all that much anymore. But, like, in 2018, he took a poll. Like, he asked a lot of Bronco players at that time on the roster what quarterback they would want on their team. And, like, the majority, based on percentages, wanted Lamar Jackson. Wow. But that's the thing too, is, like, even based on where he was as a prospect, like Lamar, we never would have been able to, just in the terms of patience, would have been able to work with that.
No. And, like, Baltimore was a perfect situation for him because, they were a winning program for a long time with Harbaugh. I know they had, like, a ugly 4-12 years sprinkled in there somewhere, but they've been very consistent. Yeah. And even with Flacco, they were one of those teams that in the playoffs, they always showed up to kick your ass no matter who you were. We saw that here. And then 2 years later, they should have beat New England when New England went on and won the Super Bowl. But yeah, so overall, I don't know. Lamar Jackson, it's just one of those things that in 2018, you saw what that looked like. I still remember being a senior in high school, and I still remember watching the wild card game or divisional round. I can't remember it, that year they had against the Chargers. And I was just like, this guy looks absolutely lost. Because remember, people at halftime, I remember people were tweeting, like, are they going to put in Flacco? Because he looked so bad. But then 2019 was when the mega breakout happened. And who knows? Like, once again, the infrastructure just was not there for, us to develop a guy like Lamar Jackson, who I had said, even 17-year-old me, who wasn't really that good at scouting, I didn't know a whole lot, or maybe I was 16 at the time. I was like, okay, floor, very, very low. Maybe it works in the college game. Maybe it works in the NFL too. But I was like, all right, very, very high ceiling.
Right.
So then that's when it just gets murky and you're just like, man. And some of these guys, like I realized they just have so much dog in them that maybe they would have succeeded regardless. Like maybe Lamar and Allen, even though they were low floor guys, maybe they would have succeeded regardless. Mahomes too. Now, yeah, I don't know. That's just a little interesting.
Yeah. And obviously there's a subtle, not Broncos thing, but head coach thing of like, what if Sean Payton actually drafted Mahomes? That's not a Broncos thing. That's a strictly like Sean Payton thing that we won't necessarily talk about. But we move forward a little bit, and that kind of brings us to the where things are a bit more stable, and that is the current state of of the Denver Broncos. And I think that obviously we'll talk about the season of 2025 from the what if angle of like, what if this happens in the Denver Broncos season, what will happen, right? Like we teased that at the beginning. But I think that kind of brings us to the biggest what if. And granted, it's hard to ever say this because the tea leaves and every sort of media, Sean Payton alluded to it, he was really mad with the amount of times he was getting leaked that, Bo Nix was his guy.
Yeah.
Given the fact that there were 6 quarterbacks taken in the 2024 draft, and I should say like in the top 15 picks, what if the Denver Broncos did not draft our beloved quarterback, Bo Nix?
So here's what I'm thinking happens. So let's just say we're sitting there at 11th, and the Jets, for whatever reason, they are open for business, even though Sean Payton did whatever he wanted. Now, let's just say, all right, guys, Sean Payton did not hide his interest in Bo Nix at all. Like, I know a lot of people like to pretend like, oh, he tricked the Vikings. Like, listen, I wear blue and orange glasses as much as anyone. Listen, he didn't trick anybody. Jay Glazer went on Fox Sports this year before a Broncos game and was like, Sean Payton potentially wanted to show up at Bo Nix's house to tell him that we were drafting him. He didn't hide shit. That's all I'm going to say. So let's just say, okay, a team like Rams, Saints, and then there was another team in there as well that was really interested in, potentially jumping. Let's just say it's the Raiders. That would suck even more. But, if we do not draft Bo Nix, here's what happens. We stay at the pick or actually, I don't even know if we stay at the pick because you best believe that with how little resources this team had in the 2022 and 2023 drafts, they probably had an exit plan. Like I remember George Payton after the 2024 draft had said, we had an exit plan at every pick, which means that they probably were not very confident in the roster going into the upcoming year, as I imagine a lot of people weren't. They were called the worst roster by PFF for a reason. Not unfairly, in my opinion, but we'll save that for another discussion. So, yeah, I don't know. Do they trade back? Do they stay at – so they get sniped on Knicks at 12 or 11. Then do they take Bowers at 12?
So that's kind of the what if that I'm kind of leaning. Maybe they still take Knicks, right? But I think the what if is, what if they take Bowers and then come back into the first round? Because a lot of people, right, felt like Knicks would have been there at the latter part of the first round. Granted, it seems like that probably never would have happened because of the fact that the Raiders were really infatuated with Bo, or even the Rams, right? Because, Snead is really close with Bo's dad. So, but but it is the one where it's just like, if they take Bowers, what is their plan A, plan B, if you will, for how are they going to want to attack the quarterback position? Because I have to think that if they do take Bowers, like, there's probably something there, because Michael Pratt was there, possibly as a choice. And it seems like the way you were kind of hearing him talk, even though the Saints have the worst roster in the last 15 years, joking, they really like Spencer Rattler.
Yeah.
So was Rattler kind of in their plans a little bit? So I've got to think, though, that Bowers was at least on that mind.
Yeah. And I remember a lot of people were saying edge at that time too. Like, I remember a lot of people when they were just like, all right, I remember early April of the 2024 draft cycle, a lot of people were just like, no. We don't have the infrastructure in place to develop a quarterback. Similar to what we were hearing a lot in 2018, which I still believe in 2018. But, a lot of people were saying Jared Verse, Dallas Turner, Leadu Latu. So, like, that's where it gets really fun. And that's where it became, like, that sort of question. And so here's what I think happens. Assuming they stay at the pick, even though there's like a bunch of trade back avenues, let's just say they get sniped on Knicks at 11. Someone comes up and jumps them. Okay, they stay at the pick. They draft Bowers. 74 is probably 74 Spencer Rattler, because he lasted until the 5th round, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then 74, you don't have John Ellis, you have Spencer Rattler. And then that's where it just becomes a little interesting. Like, I don't know, Rattler played horrible last year, but the Saints roster was also horrible. And I don't know. The guy probably never had it to begin with. Maybe Stidham gets a lot of run last year. I don't know. Then you wonder, okay, maybe Zach Wilson gets some run too. And then
Sam Darnold was in conversation too. Remember, like, because I saw David mention that, but like, that's the other part of this too. Is like, there were 2 teams that Darnold was in conversations with that year. It was the Vikings and it was the Broncos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and once again, he kind of had a mega breakout this past year, but Minnesota, let's just be honest, was a much better offensive situation this past year than we were. Like, I know we had a really good offensive line, but man, you have Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and a really, really good schemer in Kevin O'Connell. Yeah, I don't know. That's just the way I'm thinking. Like, so we probably, Darnold signed before the draft, so we didn't go into the draft with him on our roster. So yeah, that's a little interesting. Right,
but that brings everything into focus with 2025 a little bit. And so what ifs of the 2025 season, Kodiak, like, what is one of the biggest what ifs for you when you kind of now look into focus for the 2025 season, knowing the fact of where we are, right? Like, knowing the fact of where we are, which is a team that is on the rise. I mean, Colin Cowherd mentioned, a couple days ago, or actually was through ESPN, Broncos roster. We were joking about it, in a sense, the Saints have the worst roster in the last 15 years, but they're ranked 31st on, ESPN rankings as far as, rosters. The Denver Broncos, they are ranked 6th. And, so many people really feel like the Broncos roster was rather complete. I mean, you talk to at least some of the people out there. I mean, even, Mina Kimes would mention about like how complete the Denver Broncos roster is. And I know that there are certain times in certain positions, in certain position groups, where it may not necessarily seem like it's the deepest on paper, aka tight end. But I just think that, like, it's a case where, again, they are still a very deep roster. So what if? What is the what if, Kodiak?
The what if for me is, what if we were just so on an upward trajectory that what if we take a step back? And I'm not talking like take a step back as in, I don't know what would be considering taking a step back, but in 2023, I thought we massively overperformed considering what was on the team. I think the first month of the year where we started we started 1-5 in the first 6 weeks of the regular season. I think that's more indicative of the talent that was on that team. But then 2024, we were just up and up and up and up. So like, it's just, what if everything just comes crashing down? What if, we have been so fortunate with our injury luck. We have been so fortunate with our player development. What if we have been so fortunate with our positional coaching and how guys have developed, and, Benito, Mims, Moss, Allen, all taking breakouts that honestly, even I never saw coming. So, like, what if we're just too on cloud nine right now?
Yeah, to where it somewhat comes crashing, as you're saying. Like, not maybe not necessarily like 2016 crashing down.
No.
But yeah, it's one where it begs the question, because like there's so much to unravel with that, because there's stuff of how long will Sean Payton be with the Denver Broncos, right? Like how long will he be? Like if it's a case of, are we looking at other options at that point? Is Sean Payne actually started to kind of contemplate, was this actually the right thing for me? It begs the question. So, I mean, like Landon mentions, or I guess Paul starts it by saying, what if you jinxed us? But Landon mentions, what if Nate Atkins becomes an All-Pro? And true to form, Andy follows it up.
Yeah, what if Nate Atkins vaped another flavor besides root beer vape?
You could probably fill them in on the root beer vape story, since you're a first time on the show, for people that don't know.
Yes, of course. All right, Landon. What's up, Landon? Nice to see you in here. So, our guy, Marky Sports, one of my very, very good friends, and obviously friends with David Talks Broncos and Andy. He works at a vape store. His wife's family owns a vape store in Highlands Ranch. Nate Atkins came into the vape store and was such a prick about the price of the root beer vape. So, I don't know. What if he becomes an All-Pro? Then I don't know. I mean, he's only 25, 26 years old, so that's an ideal outcome for the Broncos. But for him to become an All-Pro, he probably shouldn't be vaping root beer vape.
Just a little bit. I think the what ifs, obviously, as far as like, because we talk about it as far as a talking point side of things, when it comes to the Broncos, and that is, how, the Broncos are going to be wanting to rely heavily on a running game, right?
Yeah.
What if there's no running game? Because like there's the side of it too for me that's like, there's no doubt in my mind. Granted, we saw it in college. We saw it in college with, how Bo can be operating, under the operation of that Oregon offense, which is a bit of a pass happy, efficient, offense, which is to a certain extent, what the Broncos did, as far as, there were some passes. Yes, there were some passes at or around the line of scrimmage, but yet he was still taking those chances downfield. But it's a bit of a pass happy offense, not necessarily a run heavy offense. So it makes you wonder, right? Like it makes you wonder, like, what would the Broncos' identity be if there was no running game, or J.K. Dobbins was not necessarily, making it as much as he was? Is R.J. Harvey, in that mix a little bit more as a passing threat and not necessarily as a running threat?
So if our run game does happen to stall out this past year, or this upcoming year like it did this past year, I think we're much more equipped to deal with that as an offense. Because the main complaints I had about our run game at certain points last year is that it just wasn't complementary enough to our passing game. And obviously, now that you have real over the middle of field weapons, now that you have Evan Ingram, now that you have RJ Harvey to at least attack out of the backfield, and ideally, can't say for certain, but an intermediate weapons upgrade, Mims potentially taking steps forward, Franklin potentially taking steps forward, Valet finally fully healthy coming into the year, Pat Bryant, who you drafted in the third round. So if they do not have a run game, or if I don't see how it gets worse than last year, but it's very well within the realms of possibility, because it's professional sports. Anything is possible. So I think our offense is still more efficient, but I think ultimately our ceiling is still just 24 points per game, which is not bad, which is what we got this past year. We were 24 points per game flat, and that was a number 10 offense in the NFL. So I think overall it would be more of the same from last year. I just think that we would be a better sustained offense.
Yeah, it would be one where it's just like it'd be a fun conversation to have, like once he's hit retirement, like with Sean, and like having it off record, which is, what is the ideal offense for what it is that you would like to run? Because he spent so much time with, Drew Brees, right? And Brees was in that rather pass happy, offense a little bit. So like, let's just hypothetically say, right, like that the Broncos offense did stall, or that they were using it a bit differently, which was more so in the passing game and not necessarily in, running the football. Would Sean actually prefer that? But in just the simple vein of like where things are with the offensive line, and they're in attack mode every single time and wanting to be a bit of a good run blocking team and also pass blocking team, like, and the idea of feeding to the strengths, which is, that's what any good head coach should do, right? Like, but for Sean, like, is this ideal offense actually having, multiple different options out of the backfield as pass options versus, something to where, you have a Javonte Williams running right into an offensive lineman, or even a defensive lineman, or, maybe at times J.K. Dobbins just to, get some contact. But I think it would be interesting, like, as far as like, what is it? Like, what would be Sean Payton's ideal offense?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a really interesting question, because he really likes those dudes that can attack between the middle of the field. And because oftentimes in the Sean Payton passing offense, the number 2 option as far as target share is usually the running back. He targets running backs at the highest rate of any coach in NFL history. So you look at that and you're just like, man, I mean, very well could be within the realm of possibility that he wants multiple options out of the backfield. And that's something we didn't have this past year. Javonte Williams got like 55 catches, and he was not earning targets by any stretch of the imagination. So that's really fun. That's really fun to think about. And once again, that just goes into the fact that even if, stuff goes awry with our run game, I do think we will be more sustained, just because we're going to have Harvey out of the backfield and we're going to have Ingram in the middle of the field.
And I think that that's the part of it too. And this is not necessarily a what if, but I think to your point, like, that's where I think I feel comfortable, or I should say more comfortable with this Broncos team in year 2, because I think that the fact that the Broncos are at a point where, even though they maybe, and this is just to the fact of maybe how 2024 worked, but it was just like, given the fact that there was no running game and that they were relying a little bit on their passing game, now actually is going to afford them the opportunity, so that once they finally have that established running game, they're going to be a bit more balanced, right? Like, they're going to be a bit more balanced to where they can be able to utilize the middle of the field with guys like Evan Ingram, Pat Bryant, Devon Bailey, like, so I think that it wasn't necessarily the plan, for it to certainly work out that way. But I think in the long run and the overall development of where things are going to be going, I think for the offense, as far as balance, I think in the end, it probably is actually going to do more positive than good at that. And so I think it's, and I think that the other part of it too, for maybe some of the other what ifs, if you will, is what if they actually hit the ceiling?
Oh man,
I know we're talking about some of the lows there, if you will, of like I wouldn't say lows, like, because you were saying, like, what if they hit so much of a high that it, and then all of a sudden it comes crashing down. But like, what if they hit the high?
Oh man, if they hit the high, I'm telling you, Sean Payton, did he not say it today in his press conference that you need to be comfortable talking Super Bowl, which is what the ultimate goal now is in Broncos country? Like, expectations going into the year, I think a lot of us have forgotten what that's like, to be completely honest. So what if they hit their ceiling? I mean, the sky's the limit. We've only been on an upward trajectory the past 2 years. Maybe that continues. Maybe everything goes right. RJ Harvey completely revamps not only our run game, but our entire offense in general. Jahdae Barron locking down dudes in the secondary. So then we're a tough team to play against. We get good health fortune with Greenlaw and Hufanga. So then at that point, you are a very, very tough team to beat. Like when you're solid on both sides of the trenches, where the Broncos were lacking in last year was, obviously run game, but also depth on the roster. But guess what? I feel much more comfortable about our depth going into this coming year. Like you saw what our secondary looked like when the guy behind me went down. You don't have to worry about that anymore. Like what if, if Jaquan McMillan has to play slot for a game and he's starting slot, even if Barron's wins that job out of camp, then you're not going to be like super duper concerned. Inside linebacker, that's another one.
Speaking of what ifs.
Yeah, speaking of what ifs, like my biggest what if is this upcoming training camp is what if Drew Sanders can hit his ceiling? Because the Broncos, they took him with a premium pick. They traded up for him in the 2023 draft, along with Mims and Moss. So Sanders was sandwiched in between that. But, he's kind of had an identity crisis throughout the NFL. So with, them switching his position and everything. And I'm one of those guys that I think Alex Singleton is more likely to be cut than he is to actually win a spot on this team. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
It's interesting because like we had an episode on Mainly and we talked about it on like, do the Denver Broncos really have a surprise cut candidate? And what I mean by that is like you go up and down the roster, right? Like you go up and down the roster and you're like, X player, if he was cut, would that surprise you? Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't think there's necessarily someone that would surprise you on the roster necessarily. And when I'm saying surprise, it's a rather notable name that gets cut. And you're like thinking to yourself, oh, wow, that's a bit of a surprise, right? Mm-hmm. So Alex Singleton getting cut, I don't think it would necessarily be a surprise. So if he does, and if he does, frankly, is it a bad thing necessarily for some of the fan base? I would probably say maybe to a little bit, because like given how much he's been embraced by the fan base to a certain extent, right? But I think that where it should be twisted a little bit too is that actually would be a really good sign for as a fan, and you're looking at the team, because that means the depth is great. Like the depth of where things are with the linebacker room is rather solid, because that means that possibly like Lavelle Bailey, who there was a bit of a news blurb today from Kliss that said that that Bailey had a good moment today in the very first day of training camp. And obviously we know that he had a really good like first preseason before, unfortunately, he had his ACL. So that means that Bailey may have been, one that has stepped up a little bit, or, we're finally getting the chance to see that transformation of the versatile player that Justin Sternad is, which is that, safety that he was, converted to linebacker, showing that bit of that athleticism and proven to be more of that starter that he can be long-term for a full season. Or to your point, the highest ceiling of them all, of that entire room, which is Drew Sanders, which they're finally going to be, developing him. And I think that that's probably more often than not the angle that we probably mean if Alex Singleton's gone, because it means it's Sanders has finally become that type of player that they really needed him to be, which is that inside linebacker that can be good in coverage. You can move him side and on the sideline. I mean, like he is, if he can be able to hit, like we're talking about that player that we all envisioned for him. Because I think people forget, like there were so many scouts that had him as like the number one inside linebacker in that draft class. And obviously, what did the Sean Payton coaching tree do down there in Detroit? They took Jack Campbell, but I just ahead of him. But I just think that, for Sanders, like if he hits and he's able to develop that kind of chemistry with this defense, and knowing how aggressive they are, frankly, I think if you were a Broncos fan long term, that would be the best thing for you as a defense.
Yeah, 100%. Like it is our ideal outcome that Sanders shows out during training camp. Now, is it going to happen? I mean, everything's up in the air right now. It's a new season, whatever. But, behind Dre Greenlaw, like inside linebacker, I would say that this defense currently, as it's constructed, has no holes. But Greenlaw is not a guarantee, as much as I want to say that he'll help us. And I do think he was the free agent that helped us the most. Like he was number one on my free agency big board for a reason. Because last year we watched our big liabilities in key games were Barton, Sternad, and PJ Locke. And obviously PJ Locke had the back surgery. But, over the middle of the field and covering tight ends has been such a black hole for us. Last year, it wasn't against bad teams. It was against good teams.
Right.
Once you played the Bengals, once you played the Chargers twice, once you played the Ravens, once you played Buffalo, you saw defenses, they knew where to attack on this defense. So it is our ideal outcome that we get one of those guys. Heck, it doesn't even need to be Drew Sanders. I think the coaching staff really likes Drew Sanders because, they activated him way, way, way sooner than they should have after his Achilles tear. But, he made plays on special teams. And worst case scenario, he just becomes a really good special teamer, which is that what you want out of a third round pick? No. But especially one who you took with the vision of, being an every down player for your defense. But, Kareem Reed, JB Brown, Lavelle Bailey, as you had mentioned, there's a lot of questions about this inside linebacker room. I can't wait to see them get answered because, like I said, Greenlaw's not a guarantee. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens if, in that room.
Yeah. And again, and if we are splitting hairs with this defense, which again is top 5.
Yeah.
It's the linebacker or the inside linebacker room. And on the offensive side of the ball, I think we don't need to look no further than probably the other what if of the offense, which is, one of the weakest rooms of not just the Broncos, but possibly the entire NFL. And that would be the tight end room. And, there's certainly, ways to look about it, which, Evan Ingram, is he a tight end? Is he not a tight end? Look, according to Madden, they put a little TE by his name. So technically he's a tight end. But yeah, we all know that he's a tight end / wide receiver. But what if the tight end room is a bit more stable moving forward in 2025? I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation because I don't necessarily think Evan Ingram, just because he's labeled as a tight end and just because he might be labeled to some people as a wide receiver, just simply having him on this roster, I think is going to bring a little bit more stability than maybe people realize there, because I think that you can finally have Troutman be a little bit more comparable or a little bit more competent, right, at times. Knowing the fact that you have that tight end of Ingram who can be able to stretch the middle of the field or be an explosive weapon on really kind of any blade of grass on the football field. So I think that just simply having Ingram's presence, I think is going to help this offense, or specifically Bo, a little bit more. So I think it's one where the tight end room, and granted, as I said, Ingram as not necessarily a tight end, but I think that just his presence of the impact of what he can have on the field will really soften the blow of what could be that overall tight end room with Lucas Kroll, possibly Caleb Lawner. But it's just I think the impact of what it can be, I think, is probably one that maybe needs to be talked about a little bit more.
Yeah, and we are very, I just want to say this, we are very thin behind Ingram still. There is still a very good chance that, assuming if we have to miss Ingram for a week, knock on wood, we go back to what we had last year, which was Adam Troutman being your tight end 1, Nate Atkins filling in or whatever, and Lucas Kroll just being out there. And Lucas Kroll is just absolutely horrible.
Best player on the team.
Yeah, exactly, according to our boy. But, Caleb Lawner, I think the fact that Lucas Kroll is not going to make this roster says a lot. So Caleb
allegedly.
Lawner, yeah. So
I know I said allegedly.
Oh, yes. Allegedly. Yes. But overall, But here's my thing to you. If something happens to Ingram, which I don't want to project, once again, knock on wood, but it's
Speaking of what if,
it's professional sports. You
Yeah.
gotta, plan for all these.
you got to do the professional jinx.
If you miss Ingram for a week, let's say it's not injury related. Let's say he like gambles on something and he gets only a 1-game suspension because I'm on here and I want to make it only a 1-game suspension for the sake of hoping that we have him for the 16 others. If you are missing Ingram from this offense, what's the difference between this year's team and last year's team?
I mean, I don't necessarily think it changes things. I think necessarily, and frankly, I think it would just be a case of what's the development for those other guys in the room. Because like we would be talking about year 2 with Bo Nix for guys like Adam Troutman and, Lucas Kroll. And the only really new person in that room at that point would be Caleb Lohner if he's allegedly on the 53-man roster, because you're talking about Atkins, Troutman, right? I think that, it's probably one where are they in terms of this? And I think I would probably at least assume one of those players would at least have a decent enough relationship with him. And I think that's probably where I would say Troutman is probably the guy that I would want to probably say that I would be relying on. I mean, even though the tight end room was pretty poor last year, I thought that still that there were times where Troutman was the one guy where you could easily be like, okay, like if you're going to at least have something where you're going to be moving the ball down the field, Troutman would give you something. Not Lucas Kroll, not anybody else, if you will, but Troutman would be the kind of guy that you would be relying off of, right? And so I think that having that safety net, if you will, like that, would be beneficial, but it's not ideal. There's no doubt, like without kind of, I'm not trying to split any hairs either, but like to kind of look optimistically at it, like it would be Troutman. But like the fact if Ingram went down, it is not great at all.
No, and like that's why, hey man, Everett's still out there, Fant's still out there. I think we should kick the tires on at least one of them. Like for real. Just because this tight end room is just still so poor. I don't think we added enough to it, like to be completely honest. That's just all I'm gonna say.
Yeah. And frankly, that is the $1 million tight end question, which is, will Ingram, the 2-time Pro Bowler, be healthy and not, get injured this season? That is the ultimate tight end, the Broncos tight end question, if you will, when it comes to Ingram. And actually, that is like the $1 million question when it comes to basically every single free agent that they signed, so far this year. So I guess you're going to play the what if is, what if they all get hurt, which is like not ideal. But
so it's not ideal, but last year, so here's what happens. So assuming we're missing Ingram, and we're missing Dobbins, I think our offense, like I said, is just better built to sustain it because of Harvey, because of, I don't know if Estime is going to take a step forward, but, let's just say he does. Let's just say he does because I'm optimistic, and he was only 21 years old last year, and I want to give him the benefit of the doubt. And again, more middle of the field weapons, and once again, you're just a more sustained attack for Bo Nix. You have a more sustained attack for Bo Nix with a better run game and everything like that. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, that's where I'm just like, oh man, because safety. Oh man, I think what happens if Hufanga, like something happens to Hufanga, you slide Jade Barron over to safety, and instead you have Jaquan McMillan or Chris Ames-Drainer, whoever, play that third cornerback role. Now, inside linebacker is where it gets very, very murky, because if something happens to Greenlaw, you're, I don't want to say in a worse position than last year, but I think, last year I was pretty happy with how Cody Barton and Justin Sternad played. Like, not against
all
the
things
good
considered, yeah.
Yeah, like considering the expectations and what they were supposed to be, like, was I happy watching them when it really, really mattered? No, they were huge liabilities for a reason. I've been mad at them since January for it. But yeah, that's where it's just like, it just gets murky. So now you have more on the plate of the front seven. Now you have more on the plate of your secondary. But, our secondary is, something happens to this guy, the guy behind me again. instead of Levi Wallace, you're going to be throwing Jahdae Barron out there.
Right.
And hopefully an improved Abrams strain. So, yes, that's where I'm very optimistic about this team. I know it wasn't specifically a team question, but, assuming something happens to all those guys, I think the Broncos are much better equipped to deal with these things than they were last year.
So we kind of round everything out, of course, in just mentioning just briefly, and now that this is the first time you're on your show, not necessarily a what if, but what is the record prediction for on the record for you, Kodiak? What is the record prediction? Is it 17-0? That's all I really care about, because you're 17-0 until you're not.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's 21-0. No, I'm kidding. That's literally not possible.
I was going to say that is impossible, because that would require them playing in the wild card game, and that would be
no. And let's say there's another undefeated team in the AFC who they don't play against in the regular season. Yeah. But talking about this, so when the schedule first dropped, and I was just going little game by game, I had them.
Did you have the James Merrillat frame of mind, and you had them at 9-8? That's all I want to know.
I was like, all right, I've seen enough. 9-8. No, that's not what I saw. My record prediction when the thing first came out was 12-5, and I would say that that's a pretty optimistic thing. But I did have us sweeping the Raiders, and the more as this offseason goes on, I'm just like, man, Allegiant Stadium was a house of horrors for us for a few years. So I guess right now, if I'm looking at this from a lesser optimistic angle, even though it's not, I think projecting 11-6 is being plenty optimistic. I think they will go, I will lock in 11-6, because that's with them losing to, but this is them beating Cincy. This is them beating the Packers. This is them beating the Chiefs once, beating the Chargers at least once, but losing to the Eagles, because I think that's about as scheduled of a loss as it gets. Who else do I have them losing to? I have them losing to the Chargers once, losing to the Chiefs once, and then I can't remember who else I have them losing to as well, or Commanders, I think.
But 11-6. That's
11-6. So when I was going game by game, that's initially what I thought.
It's interesting, because when I originally did the schedule, breakdown for myself, it's I probably put my hat on too much, because it's just the more I thought about it, if I'm going to be playing the just pure safe card, at the end of the day, and I think that, we've had this conversation before, but it's as long as they hit 10 wins, they're at least guaranteed to be in the playoffs. And at the end of the day, for a young team and getting to the playoffs and everything like that, that's all I care. That's all we should be caring about at that point. Once we're in the playoffs, that's great. Obviously, the team themselves shouldn't be caring about that. They should be, obviously caring about more than that. And it's pretty obvious when you talk about the team, it's very obvious about that. So I think the more looking back on it, I think 12-5 is a bit of a ridiculous prediction in my brain. I mean, ridiculous in the vantage point, because you're talking about if you're 12-5, even 13-4 at some point, that is boundary first seed territory.
Mm-hmm.
And also too, let's just say that the division, is going to be a good division, which we all would agree. I think this is, the best division of football, next to probably what we did see in the NFC North. But even then, with the NFC North, you're not going to have every single season that was that NFC North, which is 3 of those teams hitting 12 wins. You're never going to see that, probably anytime soon, and if you will, might be in the next 5 years or something like that. So expecting the Chargers to have 11 wins and the Broncos to have 12 or 13, and then the Chiefs to have 12 or 13, it's irresponsible. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that's why I'm probably on that territory of 10-7 again, or even 11-6 of that, so because at the end of the day, it's as long as we hit the playoffs and we're doing it at the right mindset and the right frame of mind of where we are as a team, we're better equipped to go into the playoffs, I think, and win a playoff game right now in 2025. So it's funny I mentioned this, because there was actually a really good comment in here and it was if this new Denver team played the Bills in the wild card round, would they have won?
Oh man, that is a really good question because, when I think about what the big problems were in that game, well, I think our skill position play was just so poor across the board. But then you're adding Harvey, then you're adding Dobbins, so your ground attack is automatically better. But then again, the Bills got better too this offseason. So I'm just like, so it's 2025 Broncos versus 2024 Bills. I still would probably give the edge to Buffalo just because they've been there before, just because, the game ended 31-7 or whatever it was. Now, granted, it felt like it was still in reach for a large portion of that game. But man, you look at what had happened. We were just getting run over. Like we just flat out got run over. We couldn't stop James Cook. And that was what really, really happened. And the defense, they didn't start getting tired until the offense couldn't sustain their drives. So maybe you're on something because with Ingram, with Harvey, chain movers, guys that help you be a more sustained offense. That's what drove me nuts about this team last year was it felt like we were watching Diet Russell Wilson ball where we were a higher scoring team, but man, oh man, 3 and out a lot. We didn't turn the football over as much, but it just felt like we weren't sustained. So, very well could have if we were a more sustained offense.
Speaking of what ifs, what if we hit that field goal at halftime in that playoff game?
Yeah.
And we didn't talk about, the biggest playoff what if, which is be Raheem Moore, because I figure that's could be everybody's what if.
Yeah.
But talk about a current what if what if the Broncos hit that, what if Lutz hit that field goal at halftime? The confidence of us as Bronco fans would have been pretty, I wouldn't say cloud 9 because cloud 9 would be winning the playoff game, but it would be one you are definitely far more confident going into that second half, even as a team, knowing the fact that, because I look back at that drive, man, and I'm remembering too, all the commentary. And granted, I know people have their certain biases and comments about Tony Romo's a broadcaster, but I will say there's just something about when a broadcaster hits it at the right time. And there was a point in that game, and it was in that 2-minute drive where even before it began, Romo said something to the likes of, this is where Bo Nix will show up or has to show up.
Yeah.
Or something, or prove that he's that guy. He did.
Yeah.
Actually, he did. He drove him all the way down. He pushed him into field goal range. But it was not Will Lutz that we had seen all season. It was Will Klutz, in that moment. And he didn't get the field goal. But I do think that if they hit that field goal, it probably would not have been a different outcome. But the confidence would have been so much higher at that point.
It's so funny that you talk about all right, you got to show up here. And if you show up, this is where he's made it. I think back to that moment. The moment I knew we had a franchise quarterback is obviously we had a good game against Carolina where every time Nix dropped back, I knew we were completing the pass. That was an awesome feeling. But then 2 weeks later, we go into Kansas City. 4.5 minutes left on the clock. And then I'm just all right. We got the ball at the 40 because Bucker really made a mistake on the kickoff. And then I'm just all right, if this is our guy, he is going to show up right here. I didn't expect us to go down the field. I didn't expect Bo Nix to orchestrate the game-winning drive. Now, granted,
or estimate to play really well, if you want. That's a sidebar, but yeah.
Yeah, no. I didn't expect any of that. I mean, he kind of played well that game, but, looking back at the bigger picture of last season, I agree with estimate. But, I was like, dang, if we really have our guy right here, he's going to let his nuts hang. And on that 3rd and 6, rifles it over the middle of the field. Now, unfortunately, you guys know the rest. But as far as I'm concerned, that was a game-winning drive from Bo Nix. So, yeah.
And it's funny, having that kind of conversation because it's just what was the moment for you, in the sense, for instance, it was the Kansas City game for you. And I think when all is, said and done, that still showed out to be the moment where he became a franchise quarterback. I think for me, it was, I think it might have been the Colts game because like it was a case where like he was really starting really slow. Like the offense itself, like the offense in general was like pretty, like it was sputtering, and and I was at that game, and the offense just really didn't get itself together. And frankly, Bo didn't have his best game overall, even statistically. He didn't really have his best game. But like the second half hit, and it was just like, oh wow. So now things are kind of clicking a little bit. We're moving the ball. We're finally running a little bit. And so at that point, it was just like the fact that we were at a point with a quarterback where he can weather the storm. He may be encountering a battle, but he's going to overcome that battle. Like I think the fact that we saw that gave me a lot of, hope for, like, let's just say he did go into Buffalo, right? Like, so it's just one of those cases, like they do get that field goal. There was at least enough confidence that he's actually going to, have a little bit of a much better second half, right? Where even like for Troy Franklin's sake, like he hit that touchdown to Troy Franklin, like maybe the confidence is a little bit better there in that second half to where you're seeing a little bit more Troy Franklin in the second half as well. So it's just like, I think it's just the fact that he weathers storms so well for me is the moment I think it truly realized was like, they really have something here.
Yeah. And there were a handful of games last year where it wasn't always pretty, but he never gave up. Like against Seattle, week 1, we had an opportunity to stop Seattle, but we didn't. And then week 4, ripping that ball to Sutton over across the middle of the field in the rain in that Hurricane game. And then, yeah, obviously there were a whole lot of games where I'm just like, our quarterback never gave up. Like, just flat out. Like, even in the Buffalo game, I felt like he was let down by the entire rest of the team. And, week 18 last year as well, that was another one where, I think we were all pretty scared going into that week. Or I don't think we were.
To a certain degrry, maybe.
Yeah. I think, we were 12.5 point favorites for a reason. But
it did cause a lot of worry. Because I was at the game too. It's just like he's like, okay, are we really gonna blow him out like we should?
Yeah, it's exactly like had we won that game by like a field goal, I think everybody would have been
yay!
Like, yeah, literally. And I'm just like,
yeah.
Shit. Now, the one thing I just want to see us close out games better next year.
Yeah.
And it doesn't solely rely on Bo Nix, but we had the lead going into the halftime against the Chargers, and then we had that horrible, horrible penalty, super unclutch moment from Tremont Smith right there, which gave the Chargers momentum. And then, against the Bengals, we had 2 drives in overtime. We had 2 chances to put them away. We couldn't. And then, yeah, overall, I just want us to finish games. And I think, that's the trajectory of Nix. Like, statistically, I don't really know what it's going to look like from the Broncos this year, but I expect us to be better closing out those games. I expect us to play good teams better. I expect us to have a better record against those good teams because of the improvements that we've made. Yeah,
it's going to be it is going to be a fun ride. The Bo Nix ride. It's going to be a fun Bo Nix ride. Well, Kodak, this was a blast, man. Thank you so much for hopping on with us. Before we go, why don't you go ahead and give a shout out where people can follow you over on your YouTube channel. Check out all the content that you're doing over there.
Yeah, of course. So you can follow me on Kodiak Broncos Podcast on YouTube. I post the most over there. If you like something that's easy to watch and listen to, that's kind of my style. I also post little shorts on TikTok as well at Kodiak Broncos Podcast. If you want to see hilarious Broncos shit posting on Twitter, you can follow me at Kodiak Broncos, which is listed right there as well. So yes, I also do Horsepower Hour every Tuesday night on David Talks Broncos channel or Marquee Sports Denver's channel. We stream it to all our channels. So yes, thank you for having me. This has been an absolute blast. Absolutely blessed to be on.
Speaking of real content, he did tweet something out today that was real footage from training camp. That was Evan Ingram. Unfortunately, the phone quality wasn't necessarily the best. So please go check it out. But yes, really high quality stuff over there on wink wink nudge nudge over there on X. This has been an absolute blast, and as always, as we round out the show, of course,
let's go Broncos.
Fast lane when I pass in the street, bag of money in the passenger seat. Tempo's been asking for me on the road from the west to the east. Way up, I might never come down, cause the coast's racking up the flame out.